Hello and welcome to another episode of The Coder Career. I'm your host as always, Cameron Blackwood, and today I'm joined by my guest, Stevo The Dev. Stevo, like myself, is a fellow career changer based in Scotland's Central Belt. He has a fascinating story going from musician to tour operator to developer. Stevo is also a fantastic content creator. You can find his links in the description. Today's interview is primarily themed around the lessons we've learned and what advice we'd give to people who are embarking on the same journey that we started on. Remember, if you want to chat more and suggest ideas for episodes, do feel free to join the Discord. It is for free and it is in the description. And now on with the pod. The labour market as a whole is changing, and tech companies are always at the forefront of innovation. More and more companies are adopting a 4-day work week, so 32 hours at a full salary. Imagine what you could do with an extra day in your week. You could spend more time with your family, work on side projects, or take up a new hobby. And that's why I'm delighted to say that the Coder Career is brought to you by 4dayweek.io. Created by previous guest Phil McParlin, it's a job board where you can find the very best jobs that work a 32-hour work week. So what are you waiting for? Get that extra day in your week. Go to 4dayweek.io to find out more. Hey Stevo, thanks so much for joining me. How you doing?
Yeah, great. How are you doing?
Yeah, can't complain. It's absolutely freezing here, but I feel like I start every podcast by complaining about how cold or wet I am in general, but I would just get sunburnt otherwise. So it's just how it is. I mean, you're fairly close by to me, aren't you? Actually, 'Cause I can't remember if you're in Edinburgh, Glasgow. You're somewhere in the Central Belt, right?
Yeah, I used to live closer to Edinburgh, but I've actually just moved to Coatbridge, which is
Oh, nice.
pretty closer to Glasgow. So yeah, but yeah, no, still Central Belt, so still getting the cold weather. So
Cold weather, but we also get hoagies in our takeaways, which if you are not from Scotland and you come and visit, get into your nearest like kebab house, get yourself a hoagie and you'll be sorted. Anyway, for people who are not familiar with yourself or hoagies, do you want to give a bit of an introduction into who you are and what you're all about and what you're working on?
sure. So I'm Stevo The Dev, based on my YouTube channel name, which is Stevo The Dev. Basically, I'm a self-taught software engineer who in 2020 was actually a tour bus driver slash tour guide. And then obviously we all know what happened in 2020 and lost my job and things like that. And then basically
Don't say the
upskilled.
actual word, it gets the podcast like we'll get a flag saying don't talk about this.
Yeah, yeah, that was a no bueno. Yeah. So yeah, we know what happened. So yeah, that happened, and then basically I became a software engineer. I just basically took most of my savings, I think, a lot of money, and dove into a coding boot camp, Code Clan, which is quite well known here in the Central Belt because I think it's like the only sort of big coding boot camp we have here.
I think it is the
Um,
only one, yeah. A former podcast
yeah,
sponsor as well. So shout out to CoClan. Thanks very much for supporting
yeah,
us.
yeah, exactly. I think there's maybe other ones maybe up and coming, but yeah, nothing as big as that. I think. Um, yeah, and then did that after sort of a couple months learning on my own and things, and then came out of that. Spent a couple months looking for a job, and then the rest is history. Really, managed to get a job. The story of how I got a job is quite interesting actually in itself. But managed to get a job, and then 2 years later, still doing it. So got another job
Very
again,
nice.
and yeah, it's going well.
Very nice. That's it's interesting. We actually have shared a job before. I don't have it on my LinkedIn or anything, but I also used to be a bus tour guide. Did you do it up here in Scotland or?
Yeah. So I was based in Edinburgh, which is I used to live closer to there, so it was convenient then. But maybe not now. Um, and we used to do tours up to like the Highlands and things.
Oh,
And
nice.
so up to like Loch Ness was like the common one because that's where everyone goes, right, to look for Nessie. Um, but yeah, we used to go to like the Skye and like, all the isles and stuff as well, and like the North Coast and even like the borders and stuff as well, which is quite nice. So yeah, it was really cool. It was really fun, but it was really exhausting as well.
Yeah, I can
um,
imagine.
a full-time job, it's hard going, especially in the summer. You're away from home all the time and long hours as well. But it's an experience. I would say that.
Yeah, it's one of those jobs like I struggled to deal with the general public for such a long time while I was doing it. So I did it in London. So I'd do 3 3 hour tours a day basically. And by the end, I was just like not having it. I think when I did that, I realized I was maybe not the best suited to working with in something immediately client facing. So obviously I went and did sales and recruitment for like 4 years. But yeah, then I found my place. But yeah, tour guiding it's a fun job, but it is as you say, it's an exhausting job, and I think I would much prefer to sit at home in the cold weather and make API calls all day. That is a lot more fun.
Exactly. Much cozier.
Yeah. So what was the process for you? Because you've got kind of three kind of careers, haven't you? Because you've got the tourist stuff, but then you're also a musician. So you went to uni for music, right? How did you start with that and end up becoming a software engineer? Because it's an interesting link. Lots of people have that, musician to software engineer.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? Basically, at school, that was sort of all I was interested in, music. I was a bit of an edgy teenager. Went through that phase. I still love music, to be fair, and I'm still a bit of an edgy teenager at heart. Um, just don't look so much like it. But yeah, I just spent my entire time at school sort of living and breathing music. Basically, that's all I wanted to do. So I took that route and went to uni doing that. Um, Sort of tech stuff was always in the back of my mind because I remember sort of early in school, I used to do like computing classes and stuff. And we had like a little sort of module where we did programming and we were using Scratch. Don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah, I've used it when I did
Yeah.
CS50. I
Hmm.
um I tried it, and it's a lot of fun. It's actually quite hard to make something good, but yeah, it's pretty satisfying once you get it working.
Yeah, yeah. It was. I remember doing that, and it was really fun. We made like a little silly game that was like it was like King Kong or something. You had to like climb the skyscraper and dodge the planes and stuff. It was interesting. But yeah, I remember that. It was sort of in the back of my mind, sort of as another thing I enjoyed, but just didn't go down that route, thinking, oh, I'm not clever enough for that. I'm not smart enough, you know. So I was more like the creative type of music and stuff. So that, and I sort of failed maths as well. So I thought, well, I'm definitely not the logical type. So I'm just going to go do music then, even though I passed physics quite easily. So I don't know how that happened, but anyway, went for that, did that, got a degree, got my bachelor's in music, and then found out I didn't like it, like as a profession. I sort of just managed to drag myself through that degree by the end, and then I tried to do something with it, whether it was like teaching, because I quite like teaching stuff as well. So I tried to go into teaching. It didn't really work, especially we don't really get on the kids that well. I'm not really a kid person, so
Fair enough.
that didn't really work out when most music lessons are with kids the vast majority of the time.
And they're
So
probably not that competent at the instrument they're playing, I would imagine, the vast majority.
no, no, I mean that's not so much an issue because the basics I suppose are the easiest to teach, but yeah, it's the you have to have the patience to keep them from being distracted and stuff like that. So it wasn't really for me, and there definitely wasn't like a full time income in that either. So I ended up stopping doing that, and I tried to do film music for a while as well. So I did actually make a little bit of money from this as well. But again, it wasn't like an income sort of that you can live on. Um, I made I remember it was quite a funny story from this. I made like a 2 minute sort of music, sort of just like background music for like a short film that ended up in like an indie film festival kind of thing. And they were playing these sort of trailers and things. And where was it? It was in Edinburgh somewhere. I think it was like the Playhouse or something. I don't know. It was in Edinburgh, and my partner's sister uh, was doing theatre stuff at the time, and she must have done something else, or even for that thing, because she was at the festival and she was watching the stuff as well. With like, partner was there and their family and things. And they're sitting there, they're watching the credits for this trailer, and then my name comes up. I hadn't mentioned to her that I'd done this. This was like a few years after I'd done it. And she just seen my name and she went, that's Stevo. What's he doing on this? And I was like, oh yeah, I wrote film music. was like, what? And we'd been seeing each other for about a year at this point, so it was weird. But weird I hadn't mentioned that, but yeah, that was funny. But yeah, that didn't really go anywhere ultimately. So that was just kind of like a fun thing that I tried. Quite liked it, but again, it wasn't really like a full time income in it. So at that point, I was what age was I? I must have been about 20, 21 at this point. So I'm a bit older than that now. I think we were roughly the same age, I think. Yeah, after that I had to find a full time job. So I basically gave up the whole music thing, and that's when I went into buses basically because my family were there's a few family members basically that are involved in the transport industry and things. So it was kind of like a natural sort of jumping off point of, well, they're doing it, they're making enough money, and I like driving and things, I like cars and stuff. So I thought, well, that doesn't sound too bad, just driving around all day and taking money and stuff like and just kind of looking at people and going, "There's your ticket," and then that's it, and then just drive around. Sounds easy. So it's not easy, by the way. Spoiler alert.
No, I
It's
can
not.
imagine, especially a bus.
Yeah, it's quite stressful at times actually. It definitely wasn't. Yeah, I didn't want to stick around there for long. It wasn't a very good job at all. They don't get paid very well either, which is not good. Yeah, actually, I borderline say that it's almost criminal how much they don't get paid. Like it's ridiculous how low it is. Um, but yeah, it's a thing that happened. So I did that, and at that point, music kind of just became a distant memory, really. I still listen to it. I still played it for a bit here and there, but like studying it for so long just kind of took the passion away to play and stuff because you just kind of criticize everything at that point. Like if it's if it's something that you've studied for that long and had like critiqued for that long by professionals and things, like you can't really sit and play stuff for fun. I find, and
Mm.
that's what happens. I find when you turn anything into a career, sometimes you just make it too professional to enjoy. Right? It's just can't really be a hobby at that point. But like listening to it, I can still do that. I still kind of overanalyze stuff at times, and I get bored with stuff really easily. But that just means I've got quite like a wide music taste, I guess. So it's that as well. So yeah, it's still in my life, but it's not something that I do basically. So
Yeah, it was a
yeah,
bit of a, dare I say, busman's holiday relating to your previous job.
exactly.
So how did you end up discovering tech then? I mean, you go into some detail more on your YouTube channel actually, which I should definitely shout out because you make some really great videos. How did you discover it from you? So you're driving the buses at this point, and then you discovered tech. What's the story there, and what made you sign up for CoClan and everything?
Um, so the actual point where I sort of turned around and went, "This is what I want to try, and this is what I want to do." Basically, it was round about the time, not when I had been laid off, but I knew I was going to be laid off. I'd actually already been looking for work sort of just before all the COVID stuff kicked off, just not doing like tech stuff. I was actually looking at like sales jobs and stuff, just trying to think like what else can I do with like customer service experience and stuff like that. What else would I be good at? And that I did a couple of interviews and things, but nothing really worked out. So I was kind of at a loss really. And then when I actually did get laid off, um, that's kind of round about the point when I'd already started learning. But basically, the weeks leading up to that, um, I was looking at different things to do, and then I just happened to remember, back at school, like, what other kind of stuff was I doing at school and things. What else do I know? And I was sort of thinking about that sort of programming stuff we did in like the early years, using like Scratch and things. And I think, well, maybe I should give that a go again. Maybe I should go and see how do you actually do that? Like, the Scratch still a thing? Like, I literally had to go and Google that again. Like, I was like, how do you actually get into this stuff? Could I do this stuff as a career? And that's when I fell down the rabbit hole of like software engineers and what kind of stuff that they do, what kind of stuff you need to know, and the kind of like kind of money you can make, and like working from home and stuff like that, and how good a career it is. Like the working sort of conditions as well are generally really good in comparison to what I've experienced in the past. And I thought, well, this sounds great. So if I can get into that without a degree as well, I don't have to go back to uni or anything like that. Then great, I'll do that. So yeah, basically it's probably around spring at this point, sort of March, April. That was around the time I'd been laid off. At the same time, I was like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm learning Python. That'll get me a new job, right? So yeah, learning Python for a couple of months, and probably around probably around May. I think I was like, I'm going to join a coding boot camp now. I think because I was like, I'm serious about this. I'm going to try and get a job doing this, and I thought the quickest way to do this because I didn't have all day to do it. I didn't have all year even like to do it because I was kind of just running on savings at that point that I got from like the tourism stuff and that. Luckily, I was living with my dad actually, so I didn't have to like pay for like a mortgage or anything just yet. So luckily, no dependence of that either. So I sort of had a little while to study, but not forever. So basically, I researched coding boot camps and things because I came across the term on YouTube and things. Um, Code Clan came up, dug a bit into them, realized they were sort of a legit business. It wasn't like a scam course or anything because there was a lot of that. Because like the SQA, they're sort of backing it and things, which I thought, well, that's obviously decent. There can't be too much wrong with it if that's the case. And I've seen a lot of good testimonials and stuff as well. There was a lot of people saying good stuff about it. So yeah, I kind of just dove in at that point. Got in touch and applied for the course, got on the course, and yeah, that was a thing for 4 months. Went for that, and yeah, still wanted to do it afterwards. I would hope so because that's a lot of money wasted if it didn't. So, but I know a lot of people drop out and things, which I couldn't have imagined myself doing. At that point, I was like, I don't have a choice. Like this, I put myself in this position now. This is what I'm doing. So I had to be sure that that's what I wanted to do. But obviously, I was right, I guess, because I'm still doing it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think for me, with the dropping out stuff, I think for me the reason why people often seem to drop out of coding boot camps. So I I'm a weird one where I'm kind of self-taught, kind of went to a boot camp. So I went to like a React course that was a few weeks, but I'm mostly self-taught. So I'm kind of a hybrid of the two. But from what I've observed with bootcamp dropouts, because I've spoken to a few people that have been considering if it's for them, a lot of the time, assuming it's a good boot camp and they're not dropping out because boot camp's rubbish, um, they're dropping out because they didn't commit enough time to it before to realize that it's something for them. And I reckon realistically, if I'm not trying to gatekeep here, but if you're going to spend money on a coding boot camp, especially if it's not money that you can really afford to lose, then I would advise you need to spend at least 100 hours coding before you do that, and ideally cover the majority of the syllabus by self-teaching, because then you get to this point when you get into the syllabus and then other people are going to be behind you, so you can help explain those concepts to people, which is such an important skill. So that's kind of how I think boot camps can be done the right way, because you're ahead of the curve that way, and then you can take a leadership role through all the projects and stuff like that. But I mean, what do you think about that? Do you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I didn't quite spend 100 hours, but yeah, I think 100 hours is a good benchmark. I probably wasn't far off that, but yeah, I could have ideally spent a little bit longer. But it is kind of what you said, like at least for the first few weeks, I was like, oh yeah, I know this stuff, and I was sort of telling people how to do it and things. And then we got to the frameworks, and I was like, I'm lost. But like when it came to all like the basics and stuff, yeah, I was like, yeah, I know how to do all this stuff. I've done it. Like it's fine. Um, and then yeah, it eventually the course started to catch up with what I'd learned previously, and then I was like, okay, now I'm starting to struggle a little bit. But if you can, like, the more you can do before you start one of these courses, you'll get more out of it, basically. So if you don't have a lot of money past, what you need to buy the course, like buy your time on the course, if you don't have much other than that to live on or anything like that, then you really have to make it worth it if you're absolutely 100% determined to put all that money into it. So the best thing you can do, as you said, is spend as much time as you can on going through the stuff yourself. And understanding it as much as you can, because as much as you think you understand it the first time listening to it, you don't. You really don't. Um, to go over it as much as you can, and yeah, give yourself as much as an opportunity to absorb it as you can, basically.
Yeah, the human mind improves recollection through repetition and also through mixed sources. So, if you're listening to it from an instructor, you're reading it yourself the first time because you're doing this before the coding boot camp. And then when you're on the coding boot camp, you're going to recall a bit more once it's spoken to you by the instructor. And then when you're writing it out, the code itself, it's going to be clear, and then you're going to recall more. So, yeah, it's definitely the best way to do it. And obviously, that 100 hours figure for me, that's just something I plucked out of my head. So people who are listening, please don't panic. I think I'm more just meant spend at least a couple of months or so, not coding like all the time, obviously, but like coding pretty regularly, just seeing if it is for you. You don't have to understand everything, but like just seeing if it is for you is usually a good yardstick, so to speak. And for you now, because we have a lot of people who are in that process now of boot camp or self teaching, and they're curious about what it looks like on the other side. Um, You've been a full-time dev for about 2 years now, if I understand correctly. What's a typical day in the life like for you now?
Now it's pretty chill, to be honest. It's working from home's great that way. Your first job might not be a fully remote work from home kind of deal, and it certainly wasn't for me, and that's fine. That's just it's the nature of the beast, really. But you do eventually get to that, and it's great, basically. But how it is for me just now is, well, saying that I'm actually editing a video about this just now, which is interesting. But it's funny timing. But basically, what I do on a day-to-day basis is I wake up around 8, I'd say. Sort of roughly 8 o'clock, fall out of bed around then. um, Go downstairs, grab some breakfast and things, turn the laptop on, check Slack, check tickets, sort of remind myself of what I was doing the day before, because I can't even remember what I ate the day before, never mind a ticket I was working on. So yeah, definitely give that a look over again. Yeah, if I've got any Slack messages or anything sort of that needs my attention, do that. Otherwise, I might sort of get to work. But then around 9:30, that's when we do our daily stand up or scrum or whatever, where we talk about what we've been doing. We do it in a way where we sort of work backwards from QA to the devs. So we basically go to the QAs first and ask them, like, how the ticket's getting on, is there anything that's came up, any issues, any blockers, etc. Um, and then eventually that'll get to the devs, and then we'll go back the way towards anything being tested by the devs. So we do dev testing as well, anything in PR, any open pull requests, and then finally back to like the sort of in progress stuff in the backlog kind of thing. And just talk about all that, any blockers, any issues, stuff to raise in general, other than just the tickets. After that as well, and then that typically for us lasts sort of between 15 minutes and half an hour. It depends on what's happening, really. And then from about 10 o'clock onwards, it's usually a mixture between either sort of working solo on my own tickets, pair programming. We do that quite a bit. So I'll pair up with someone else in my team. There's me and two other devs on my team. So I feel like that's like a common size for most dev teams, usually 3 or 4 devs on like a medium to large size company. I think
My
about
current
three or
one's
four devs.
massive. We've got like 10 devs on our team. It's huge.
Really? Wow. Um, yeah, so maybe many more. But yeah, like 3 to 4 devs, I suppose, is to be expected for, I'd
Yeah,
say,
that's
most
about
companies.
average. I think for ours is because it's
Yeah,
split between a couple of projects.
yeah, that's fair enough. We've got other like sort of teams within a team as well. We've got like a larger team, which obviously
Mm.
there's loads of devs in that, but um, we've got like a sort of little mini team where we have our own stand up and things like that as well. Um, but yeah, I go to one of the other 2 devs because they're a lot more senior to me as well, which is an interesting dynamic. We sometimes pair on things in that. Other than that, if I'm not working on stuff either myself or with someone, I'm generally at a meeting of some sort, whether it's sprint planning or like estimating tickets come in for like new features, new projects, and things. Um, bugs and things. If we need to talk about a blocker and a bug, or even a feature, just blockers in general, or anything that needs discussing, just anything, any sort of thing that we need a meeting for, that could take place sort of between 10 and 12, or we sometimes have them in the afternoons as well. It just depends on people's calendars sort of line up. But then 12 o'clock is when I take lunch. We're quite flexible that way, where we can kind of just take lunch whenever, really. But we generally take about an hour, so I take mine sort of 12 to 1, which is, I guess, expected. And then it goes back to sort of, work on whatever, or have a meeting with whoever. Sometimes in the afternoons, like on the last Friday, like a sprint. Like if anyone's listening and doesn't know, a sprint's 2 weeks long. So at the end is sort of every 2 weeks. We get a few hours back, sort of on Friday afternoons, to do like personal development time, or innovation time, as we call it, where you can basically just learn or sort of upskill or do what you want. It might be beneficial to the company, it might not be. They like it if it is, but you can just kind of learn stuff that will help you do like what it is that you do just better, which is quite nice. So sometimes I learn new things. Sometimes I'll just brush up on array methods or something. I don't know, something that's sort of applicable to the job I'm doing. And then other times we'll have things. We've got like a regular meeting that we have, called the retrospective, where, again, if you don't know, basically it's like a meeting where you, at the end of every sprint, you'll talk about what went well and what didn't go well in the sprint, basically, and then like record any sort of actions that need to be taken, going forward, to try and avoid that, basically, to try and sort of do better. So we have those as well. But other than that, I kind of just, like, at lunch I just kind of sort of chill. Sometimes I go out for walks and things. I do house chores and stuff because I can. I'm at home. I'll catch up on YouTube. I'll do whatever. That's the great thing about it. You can just kind of go about life, sort of run about work. Just kind of, you do some work, and then if you need to go and do something, you can, because you're in the house. If the cat needs immediate attention, you can give it immediate
I get that a
attention.
lot. In fact, I've literally just seen his paw under my door. Um, and he's got a real habit.
Yeah.
As soon as the podcasting equipment comes out, he is trying to get in the room. Like, he loves the cover of my microphone. I don't know if you've had that with your cat, but will just try and pull it off each time, or like bat at it. It's horrendous. It's especially when if I'm trying to interview someone, he's headbutted the mic a few times, and it really distorts the audio, and it's a nightmare when I'm editing it.
Yeah, my cat has this thing where if I'm like on a meeting or talking to someone or something like that, he will jump up on the desk or on my lap or something and like stare at my hands for ages for some reason, sort of moving around and stuff. And eventually he'll try and go for them. He'll try and attack and just get in the way and start meowing. And I don't know if it's like an attention thing or what, but it probably is. But yeah, that's annoying. But
It's something about
yeah,
cat owner,
like
when
that.
you pick up the cue, you just develop such a way of knowing when they're going to attack. Like, I'd never owned a cat before. I'd always liked them, but I'd always grown up with dogs, and we got Earl last year, and he has this thing that we called sport mode, where his ears just tilt slightly backwards, and that's how you just know you've got to get your hand out of the way because it's going to get bitten.
Yeah, they've always got a tail, haven't they? Yeah,
Yeah, they wouldn't be good at
exactly.
poker.
Yeah, yeah.
So we talked a bit about innovation time and stuff like that. So we call it 10% time at my job, actually. So I've heard a few different names for it. I guess that's one way that you've upskilled throughout your career. But what are some other ways you've upskilled? Because you've progressed quite a bit in this 2 years now, to the point where you're comfortable in, I think, in your second dev job now, where you're getting more senior and things like that. What would you say is the secret for someone who wants to maximize that first couple of years in their career like you have?
I think one thing which might be controversial to some, I don't know, but it's definitely a strong opinion I have, is job hopping's okay.
It absolutely
um,
is.
yeah, like I know some people are kind of like all about the loyalty kind of thing, but I mean, businesses, especially if you're new, like, and it's quite a small business, will drop you at the, as soon as they have to drop you for whatever reason, they won't hesitate. And for the same reason alone, you probably shouldn't hesitate to look elsewhere. Or if a better offer comes along, you shouldn't refuse it just because you sort of owe something to a company for, say, giving you a chance or something like that. My first job, my manager was kind of one of these people. He was someone who was in a bad place and then got his job as sort of creative director or whatever. He was like a designer basically, in my old place, and he'd been there for years, and he was quite unhappy with a lot of the stuff that was going on, and you could tell that, but he just had this sort of blind loyalty in a way, no matter what went on. And I could literally show him, like, here's what you could be doing, like, here's all this other stuff, like, why don't you go and try something else? Or you learn a lot of other things, you meet new people, like, you know it's a kind of no brainer for not just salary wise, but like, you learn a lot of new stuff, you meet a lot of new people, and you get to work on a lot of new things. There's a whole lot of reasons why you should sort of switch jobs every so often, even if you do have experience. And he was just like, yeah, no, I like it here. You know, these guys gave me a job and gave me a chance when I didn't have anything else, and that was kind of his excuse for sticking with them, really. And I always thought, he's got so much potential to do a lot more because he's really good at what he does, but that holds him back. So one thing I do like to hold on to is, like, if you really want to upskill and learn new things and experience new things and things like that, don't get attached to any particular project or like company or anything like that. Like, go where it makes most sense for you to be for your own development, basically.
How do you know where that is? Is it do you get that feeling like mentally that you're being challenged just enough about being completely chucked in the deep end? Like, how would you say someone can tell, yeah, I'm in the right place now, I found the right thing for me at this time?
I think it's different for everyone, but for me, in my first job, the reason I left was, well, one of the main reasons I left was actually sort of for upskilling reasons. It was I'd kind of hit a wall. There was no one
Mm.
senior to me. I was the only dev for a while, actually, and then there was a second dev that was brought in sort of kind of under me. He did have a bit less experience than me, but he did come on really quickly, to be fair. So I kind of just got to a point where I was like, this isn't really what I want to be doing. A lot of the work I was doing was sort of dev adjacent as well. It wasn't strictly dev stuff. I was sort of playing the role of like product as well, um, and doing sort of admin stuff, like answering back to clients and things. And I was like, this isn't really what I want to be doing. I'm kind of wearing multiple hats here, and I'm not learning more of the things that I want to learn, like more like dev stuff, like software engineering stuff. Because it was like a small web agency, so there was only a few people handling sort of everything, multiple clients, and sort of building multiple projects for all these different clients and things. And we had to manage all that stuff as well as build it, and that it wasn't always a satisfying experience to build it either, because a lot of the times it was just things like just setting up sort of WordPress websites from like previous templates and things. Like, we'd have sort of base templates and we'd just chuck their theme over it, and it was really just sort of admin at that point. And so in my head, that sort of clicked after a while for me, and I was like, this plus any actual coding project I get to work on going nowhere and not being that satisfying. I was like, I need to find an actual software engineering job now. I think now I've got a little bit of experience, um, and just work on something a bit more satisfying. I guess something that's actually gonna sort of challenge the things that I learned and the things that I know, and also help me learn new things and learn from people more senior to me. Most importantly, because I wasn't actually picking up on like bad practices and stuff like that. Like, no one was there to tell me, like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, or this is wrong. You know what I mean? Like, that's really important, especially as a junior, because you will make mistakes like that. You'll implement stuff you shouldn't, or like you'll write something in a way where the logic's not quite right, and you don't quite know why, because you maybe don't have the context of how something works or something like that. And you really should have a senior to sort of guide you, and not necessarily spoon feed you or anything, but just be like, maybe you should do it this way. Maybe you should consider this thing or whatever. Best practice is X, Y, Z. Um, I had none of that basically, and that's ultimately what prompted me. So that and a few other things, but that was in terms of this, like in relation to upscaling and things. It was a major reason for me moving. So
So something I wanted to ask you about in general is kind of the future of the dev industry, but more specifically because you dedicated a whole video to this, which I enjoyed, about ChatGPT. Um, what do you think of the future? What do you think is the future for our role over the next few years? And do you think that people need to be afraid of ChatGPT? Do you think we can use it, or do you think it's all just a load of hot air? What's your take on it? And people should watch a full video on this as well.
yeah, definitely. So first of all, AI, I think it's going to be a very important tool going forward. I think it's going to be a very useful tool. But people are hyping it up way too much, way too quickly. I think. Like at the moment, I wouldn't really rely on it to do your sort of average daily manual task that, if done wrong, might potentially have sort of ramifications that could affect someone's livelihood, for example, or something like that. Like you don't really want any sort of manual tasks where they could otherwise be done by a human be messed up in a way that could have sort of consequences that are serious. AI gets stuff right most of the time, but when it doesn't, it can be a big problem. If it's like, say, a good example, I guess, I got banned from TikTok, right? That's a good example, right? I got falsely banned from TikTok after just making an account. Um, for what reason? I don't know. I'm assuming AI is determined that I'm a bot, basically. I'm going to just assume that off the bat. Um, and that would be wrong of it, right? And what if someone, you get TikTok creators who make a living through TikTok, and they have companies that sponsor them and affiliates and things like that. That's their livelihood. So if they just get randomly permanently banned one day for something that maybe wasn't necessarily in their control, but they don't know what they've done or something like that, and there's no human interaction there, like that can be a huge problem, I think. And eventually it might get a lot better, but at the moment, I I think the reliance we're placing on AI to govern that sort of stuff is dangerous. But it is definitely the future. Sort of the contrary to that, it's something that's going to be a very useful tool, but the key word sort of is going to be. I don't think it's quite there yet when it comes to actually replacing, as I said, manual tasks.
I've used ChatGPT a little bit actually, in not really for code, more for content because I find it much easier to write code from scratch than content. And it's kind of like a very enthusiastic work experience kid where it will get some stuff done, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily all going to be right. There's probably going to be some good stuff in there, but you're going to have a real look at what it's done. So I do not want my local hospital to start using it, for instance. However, for someone like me, um, a lot of the episode descriptions of the podcast, what I'll do is I'll write a synopsis of the podcast episode into ChatGPT as a prompt, and it will spit me out a good SEO friendly episode description, which is great. That's really handy because then I can just stick the links on it, put it up on the distribution, and then I've already noticed a slight uptick in discoverability since I started using it. So that's great. I still find I replace over 50% of what it says, but it's something almost psychological about having, certainly with like natural language, I guess, rather than code. It's very helpful actually having a framework up on the screen already for me to actually use as a point of reference, if you see what I mean. So I think it can be, yeah, very enthusiastic work experience kid would be how I'd describe it now. The code it writes seems all right. Um, I wouldn't entirely trust it. Apparently, it just regurgitates a lot of Stack Overflow answers. I don't know how true that is though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about regurgitating Stack Overflow either, but I do know that they banned the use of it.
Yeah, they did, didn't they?
Yeah. Um, but yeah, no, it's as you said, it's like it's a really useful tool. It's handy for things like SEO, but I wouldn't trust it to do an operation. It's exactly that. It's got many years, I think, before we could even consider that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think, I mean, this is obviously taking it slightly beyond the scope of a coding podcast, but I think by the time AI gets so good that it's going to be replacing more than 15% of people's jobs, and if those jobs are not replaced by new jobs that are created by this AI, if basically all those people are, there's no more jobs for them because the labor market, sorry, not the labor market, the job market has shrunk, but the labor supply has not, then we're going to have to start rethinking an economic system, basically. So obviously that's getting way out of scope of this. But yeah, I think once we get into that point, we're going to have kind of bigger proverbial fish to fry, really, and we'll have to think about what the world kind of looks like in the future, whether that's UBI or something similar. But yeah, I think I agree with you. People don't need to worry about it because I don't know how much of an undercurrent there has been, but a couple of people have sort of said to me on TikTok, actually, is it still worth me learning to code? Um, Mainly one because of AI, and two because they're worried it's going to be oversaturated. And I would say, yeah, no, definitely still learn to code. And what leads me into my final question for you, actually, would be, what advice would you give someone who has made that decision? They're not worried about AI that's going to take their job. They're not worried it's going to become oversaturated. They've come to you now in 2023 and said, look, I want to learn to code and I want to get a great job in technology. What would you advise them to do, assuming they've maybe only just started to have a cursory look at resources?
funnily enough, I actually made a video about this recently, talking about sort of technical stuff. But basically, the sort of TLDR of that is um, like learn HTML, CSS. If you're going to be a web dev, then you're going to need to know that, right? So, like, if you want a sort of look into sort of that before you get into the real nitty gritty of it, and definitely dive into HTML, CSS. It's kind of the easier sort of part as well because it's not really programming quite yet, but you
Yeah.
will need to know it.
Definitely don't rush CSS though. Sorry to interject, but definitely don't rush CSS.
No, definitely not. CSS is one of those things where it's easy to get the basics of, but can also become quite difficult, quite complex, really fast if you make it complex. Um, but it's absolutely essential that you know the basics of that, especially if you're going to do like front end web dev or anything like that. So do that. Along with that, like in parallel to that, I recommend Git, which is version control, and command line, sort of in parallel with that as well. Just learn how the command line works, how to use Git for the command line as well, and like navigating through directories and stuff. It's a bit faster in the long term when you get used to it, and ultimately gives you a better understanding of just how that kind of stuff works. It makes you better at debugging and stuff. It's just good to have a good understanding of how command line works, computers work, operating systems work in general. Um, I wouldn't dive too much into that, but like just if you could learn some of the basics of that and even just some basic computer science stuff, that's all helpful. And one good one as well that Code Clan gave me, which is actually one that I stick by, is typing. Um, Typing speed and just how you type, the typing technique is quite important. Because a lot of people will just type like just like one finger, moving one finger around, or a couple of fingers, and like they won't like touch typing's obviously the best way to do it, and like because you're just kind of your hands go into the positions, and your fingers have the positions that they go to, and you don't have to move your wrists or anything too much, and it's good in the long term for not just for like typing speed and stuff, because that obviously makes you a lot faster typing if you do that, but also health wise, it's better for your wrists, better for your hands. You're not gonna get like carpal tunnel syndrome or anything like that as much. It sort of helps that stuff. So yeah, practice typing basically because you'll thank yourself later basically when you have to type a lot, and it's not nearly as stressful on your hands basically when you're doing it properly essentially. Especially if you don't use computers much beforehand. If you've come from a background where you've not used computers much at all, and you're just kind of getting into it now, then yeah, definitely look at it because I'm going to make the bet that your typing's not exactly great. Maybe you're sort of tapping on a phone or something, not exactly typing, you know. So yeah, so it's a really important one, I'd say. Um, Once you've got all that down, I'd say basics of programming after that. So like pick a language. If you're web dev, JavaScript's a good bet. It's a very good bet. It's easy enough to learn syntax wise, and just like sort of the fundamentals of how it works is sort of easy to understand as well in comparison to some of the other things you can pick, like say, I don't know, like a lot of people dive straight into like C++, for example, if they want to do game dev, right? Because of like Unreal Engine and stuff, and that stuff's very complicated, especially as a new dev, someone who's starting from zero. I couldn't imagine diving into C++ with no knowledge of like computer science or anything like that. Like it would have been a nightmare. So I think JavaScript's a good bet for even if you're a back end dev, to be honest, because you've got Node, right? So yeah, JavaScript. That's what I did. I did Python as well, but JavaScript's a good bet. I'd say do that for a few months. Just vanilla JavaScript. Don't touch a framework because you'll see React and Vue and Angular and whatever everywhere, but don't touch them. Try and stay away from that because if you don't know the basics of whatever language you're trying to learn, then you'll dive into that stuff and then not really know how it works or anything like that, and it'll be really hard to debug, and you won't know what you're doing, and you'll get really fed up with it really quickly, basically, because you won't know how it works. Um, so it's very helpful to understand how it's working sort of behind the scenes and things like that, and it helps when it comes to actually learning the framework. Um, it sort of helps with getting past those sort of those hurdles. And once you got frameworks down and stuff as well, that's sort of the programming language side of it really before you can start looking for a job, I would say. But other than that, you've got like I suppose you've got databases and stuff as well. So if you're learning JavaScript again, a good place to start with that stuff if you want to dive into databases is something like MongoDB, which is like a sort of NoSQL, NoSQL sort of JSON, which is JavaScript object notation based database, which basically just means that is formatted with JavaScript objects, which you'll be familiar with at that point. So it'll be easy to read the database collections and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It's much easier to get started with that with MongoDB. Like I'm now moving on to SQL at the moment, and it is tough. Like
Yeah,
even as an experienced developer, NoSQL, the biggest of which being MongoDB, is I would definitely recommend that to a beginner.
yeah. I'd say it's the easier starting point. But SQL is obviously important. It depends. It depends what you're going to do, but a lot of companies use it. It depends on the stack, but say if you're going to be a Java dev, for example, you're most likely to use SQL as sort of the database with the backend, So yeah, both are important, but that's a good jumping off point if you've been doing JavaScript and things. I mentioned Node as well. If you're going to do back end stuff with it, if you're going to learn how to make a full stack app, again, you can do that with JavaScript if you want, just to get started. You can use Node. NPM is a package manager to install dependencies and things. You can use things like Express, which means you can use Node to create like a little server, so you can create projects with it and stuff, and send sort of information between your front back end. Mongoose, which is a way to, if you're learning MongoDB, you can interface with that through Node. So yeah, you can do everything with JavaScript basically. So that's why I say JavaScript, and then everything else is extra essentially. Even other languages, like learn the JavaScript stuff, and then everything else can be learned on top of that. Essentially, it's like the bottom of the pyramid. It's like other than your absolute essentials, HTML, CSS, and Git, and whatever. That's sort of if you've got like the basics of JavaScript down, like that it's a solid base to learn anything off of basically. And then you can go on to learn whatever database stuff, other languages, frameworks, cloud services, AWS and Azure and all that stuff. You name it, all that stuff is extra at that point. And then, I'd say at that point you're looking for a job probably, especially if you've got like a framework down and a language and, database stuff and all that. the one thing I'd say when there's actually two things I would say, but the first thing I would say with getting a job is LinkedIn is your friend there. Um, it helped me a lot, network and get in touch with people and stuff like that. And I've had quite a few offers through LinkedIn. It's a lot of job ads get linked back to LinkedIn and stuff, whether it's been actually created on there or not. So it's a good place to be. It's a good place for employers to discover you and things like that. So you're doing yourself the service. You're shooting yourself in the foot basically if you're not on LinkedIn trying to look for a job. The second thing I would say is a tip that I like to give people, which I haven't really seen other people give, and it's the way I got my first job actually. So what I did for the first couple of months, I wasn't really having much luck. I got like an interview or two here or there, but ultimately it was just sort of rejection after rejection. You know, the standard response for someone who doesn't have any
Yeah.
commercial experience, which is to be expected, I guess. But what I did was, if you remember back earlier in the conversation, I mentioned I'd been applying for jobs before all the COVID stuff, like for sales and stuff like that. So what I had done at the time is I'd actually connected on LinkedIn through the guy who interviewed me at the time at that company, and I knew it's kind of a niche circumstance, but I feel like this kind of stuff might help some people, or it might at least sort of give you an idea or something to maybe work off of. Um, Basically, what I did, I still had him on LinkedIn, and the company I knew at the time that they had a web team, they had a web department that created like websites and projects, and apps and things for clients and stuff. And that was ultimately what they were selling anyway. So I knew that's what they did. So I thought I'll look into them a wee bit and see, more about what they do and stuff. And I'm like, well, this is quite similar to, you know, dev stuff. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of WordPress stuff in that they do, but like, they might have devs, they might have, a dev, or they might be looking for devs. I don't know. So I thought the only way to find out is to ask. So I messaged the guy on LinkedIn. I said, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but we interviewed way back early in the year. And he's left an impression. I remembered the company and I remembered your name and things like that, and so I kept you in mind. But since then, I've been sort of upskilling and I've kind of pivoted, and I'm now a dev basically, and this is all the stuff I've been doing. I showed them like projects and things and like my portfolio and stuff, and I was like, here's what I've been doing. Here's like the coding boot camp that I've been to and stuff like that, and the kind of stuff I'm getting up to now, and I'm basically looking for a job as a dev. And I know you guys make like websites and things for your clients, so I was wondering if you may have or may be looking for in the future, a position for a dev. And he said, basically, he said they liked my stuff. First of all, he says that's really good that I've been doing that, and he did remember me. So always be a likable person because then you'll be remembered. It's actually that's something that can't be understated. Actually, is be a likable person, because that's a lot of the reason why people don't get accepted for jobs is they can't see themselves working with that person because they don't gel, they don't really vibe together or whatever. So he remembered me and he said I like my stuff, and then he said, funny you should mention that, because I was actually talking with our creative director about that do we need a dev for this project coming up, because this is a bit more delving into that sort of custom like code stuff, because they were mostly just WordPress, sort of a WordPress agency at this point. And he was like, tell you what, leave it with me. I'm going to go and talk to him and show him all this stuff you've just shown me, and I'll get back to you and let you know what he says. And I think about a week later, I had the job. He got back to me pretty quick, and he was like, listen, he really likes your stuff. Would you be able to come in for an interview like in a few days' time or whatever? Which was weird because it was still during COVID, so I kind of had to go in with like mask on. They had to do my temperature and stuff going in. It was quite a weird dynamic, and I had to sit like half a room away from them. But anyway,
That is weird.
I don't know why they didn't just do a video interview. But anyway, that's yeah, that was weird. But anyway, I did the interview, and obviously they liked me, and I got on with the guy really well because I still talk to him for one. We actually became friends for that job. We spent half the interview talking about like games and stuff. Like a lot of it wasn't even like technical stuff. I mean, it was asking me like what do I know, what I've been doing, and things like that. But he got that stuff out the way pretty quick, and as soon as he realised that I was a gamer, oh, that was him. He was offering a conversation about games because he was a bit of a gamer himself. So, um, that's that's something as well. If you can latch onto something that the interviewer is interested in, and you're interested in, like that's a way to get your foot in the door.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that obviously went really well, and I got my first job. So the sort of TLDR of that is, the way you get your first job isn't going to necessarily be applying for all the sort of external ads you see on LinkedIn that get punted out to everyone. Just like contact people, try and get in touch with people, and sort of sell yourself to people, and try and get a job that way. Sort of a less conventional way, something maybe not as obvious, and you might have a better shot then, basically. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's something I constantly preach on this podcast, on my YouTube channel, on my TikTok. So listen up, everyone. Stevo says it too. It's true. You've got to look for jobs in unconventional ways because there's a lot of competition out there, and there's going to be far less competition if the job isn't being absolutely blasted everywhere advertisement wise. So yeah, I mean, I just want to massively thank you actually, Stevo, for coming on today. It's been a really cool episode. Really great to speak to another career changer in the Central Belt. So really nice speaking. And if people want to find you, what's the best way?
Best way is, well, I've got my YouTube channel, Stevo The Dev. So I'm sure links and things will be in the description.
Be down in the description. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, just go there. You can go YouTube, Stevo The Dev, Stevo The Dev on Twitter as well. So you can, get in touch on Twitter as well. And I've got my email as well, which is stevothodevuk@gmail.com, which I'll probably be in the description as well. So in case I forget, because I always forget the UK, because without the UK you can take. So yeah, so that's email, Twitter, or YouTube.
Good stuff. And people can look for a YouTube collaboration, from us coming out in the near future, depending on when this pod releases. It'll be around the same time, so we can look out for that, and the link to that will be in the description, or the link to the channel where it will be in the description as well. So yeah, thanks again for coming on, and thanks as well to the listeners for checking out another episode of The Code of Career.